Genevra Higginson, Curatorial Assistant for Prints and Drawings here at the Blanton Museum of Art. Welcome to our series, Curated Conversations. Tonight's topic is Off the Walls into Your Home, a print collecting primer, presented in collaboration with PrintAustin's annual fair, which runs from January 15th to February 15th, and featuring selections from the Blanton's Paper Vault exhibition, Off the Walls, Gifts from Professor John A. Robertson, which I co-curated with Claire Howard, the Assistant Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art here at the Blanton. I am extremely lucky to be joined by two special guests today. Annalise Gratovich is a print-centric artist specializing in etchings and woodcuts. She exhibits nationally and internationally and travels as a guest artist and lecturer to universities and print shops where her work is published. Annalise has a professional background in print publishing, curating, and collections management, and currently resides in the Prints and Drawings department with me at the Blanton Museum of Art. She sits on the board of directors for PrintAustin and Marfa Community Print, both of which are organizations promoting printmaking through education and community engagement. Annalise, can you wave and say hi, please?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Fabulous, thank you. And our next guest is Pepe Coronado. He was born and raised in the Dominican Republic and currently resides between New York City and Austin, Texas. Pepe is a founding member of the print collective Dominican York Proyecto Gráfica, founder of Coronado Print Studio, and was a resident teaching artist at the Hudson River Museum in New York. He has taught printmaking at Purchase College School of Art Design, SUNY, at the Corcoran College of Art, Georgetown University, and at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, where he also earned his Master of Fine Arts. Pepe was a master printmaker for Pyramid Atlantic in Silver Spring, Maryland, the Handprint Workshop International in Alexandria, Virginia, and the Siri Print Project in Austin, Texas. He has been a visiting artist at Self-Help Graphics in Los Angeles. He is a board member of PrintAustin, and his works are in many institutional collections, including the Smithsonian American Art Museum, El Museo del Barrio, the Hood Museum at Dartmouth College, the Rutgers Archives from Printmaking Studios, and the Library of Congress. Pepe, welcome. Will you say hello, please?
Hi, nice to be here, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Yeah, we're so excited that you guys are both here. We're excited to have our audience here. Thank you all for joining us, just like Pepe said. With these two rock stars alongside us, we will have most of our conversation with Pepe and Annalise, but before we get into the nitty-gritty of printmaking and collecting, I'm going to share just a little bit about the exhibition Off the Walls, which celebrates a legacy of an individual's lifelong love of prints. After that, we'll get into types of printmaking with Annalise and Pepe, their practices, how they work in and with the print community writ large, what to look for when starting to collect prints, and where to find prints. So we have a lot to get into. I'm very excited. We're just gonna get started. All right. This is an installation view from the exhibition. As I said, the title is Off the Walls, Gifts from Professor John A. Robertson. Robertson worked at UT Law School for over 35 years as a leading bioethics and constitutional scholar. He came to Austin in 1980 and passed away in 2017. And though my co-curator Claire and I were not lucky enough to know Robertson during his lifetime, we really got to know him through his collection, which has been such a wonderful experience. Robertson began collecting art early in his career, especially prints, when he was teaching at the University of Wisconsin Law School at Madison, but he immersed himself in UT and Austin's art scene right upon arrival here. He befriended then Blanton curator Jonathan Bober, who is now at the National Gallery of Art in DC, and UT art historian Richard Schiff. And thanks to Robertson's distinctive eye and these relationships, not just with connoisseurs like Bober and Schiff, but also with artists themselves, Robertson built a collection that crossed geographic as well as stylistic boundaries. The exhibition highlights 33 of the nearly 90 works of art Robertson donated to the Blanton, with prints by international, Texas-based, and UT-affiliated artists, as well as modern and contemporary and figural and abstract pieces. You see here just one wall in the exhibition. On the left is a collage by Dorothy Hood. In the center is a print by Richard Serra, and on the right is another print by Eduardo Chilita. So just really quickly, we're going to look at a couple of examples of prints in the exhibition. On the left here, you'll see a print by Glenn Ligon. Talking about Robertson's collecting habits, curiosity really seemed to be one of his defining features. We invited Bober and Schiff to write essays for this exhibition, and independently, they both start their essays by commenting on how curiosity was really an informing and defining feature in Robertson's life and collecting. So Glenn Ligon is now incredibly well-known and renowned as an artist, but 30 years ago, that was not necessarily the case. Robertson, however, was privy to his printmaking and art process and bought this print as soon as it was published. It should be noted, I think it's just worth saying that paying attention to the contemporary print market often gives you a chance to collect works before an artist sort of breaks through to a larger scene. And so this print was purchased at a time when it was less expensive than it would be today. It just shows that sort of curiosity and that intrigue being sparked right off the bat. Ligon is now renowned for his works addressing racial and sexual identity, and this print relates to one of his early series of paintings with black text against white backgrounds. These artworks explore via word and image the political and social uses of language, incorporating quotations from the likes of Ralph Ellison, Gertrude Stein, Mary Shelley, and James Baldwin. Here, the text is from Zora Neale Hurston's essay, How It Feels to Be Colored Me. And Glenn Ligon has said on Hurston's words, quote, "They are meaningful in that they talk about the idea of race as a concept that is structured by context rather than by essence." And so on the right, you can see how we have the Ligon print installed in the Blanton. I'm showing you this view not only to entice you to come to the Blanton and look at the exhibition in person, but also to show you sort of the scale. You can see on the left, there is a wall-sized 6-sheet lithograph by New York artist Vito Acconci. And this is something I want you to think about as we discuss print collecting, the scale and how you might even incorporate prints into your own home. The other thread that I want you to look at is word image integration. And the pairing of word and image is really particularly well suited for prints and paper, both of which share historical roots in mechanical production and the dissemination of knowledge. Really quickly too, we're going to just look at one other print in the exhibition. Here on the left is a print by Peter Saul. He was studio art faculty at UT for almost 20 years. He is now known for paintings that combine cartoon imagery with cultural critique. And he did a series in the 1970s kind of riffing on the art historical classics like Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase, which you can see on the right. The painting is housed at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It is not in the exhibition, but you can see this playful riffing on what is sort of known in the canon. And Saul turns the investigation of Duchamp's motion dissection into a cascade of silly putty-like limbs. That subversion of a classic and dialogue with other ways of making art history is another thread that we should be exploring and just keeping in the back of our minds as we get into contemporary printmaking. There are many other fascinating prints in the exhibition with pieces by the likes of Carolee Schneemann, Philip Guston, Louis Jimenez, Sue Coe, and more. But with just this tiny slice of Robertson's example as a print collector, let's dive into what a print even is, how you can have original works of art made in multiples, and how to start cultivating relationships and interests that will be helpful in growing your own collection. Which brings us to PrintAustin. As I noted earlier, we are hosting this conversation in conjunction with PrintAustin. Their expo just began, and I'd like to quickly throw it to Annalise, who can show you this year's brochure. Oh, Annalise, do you have the copy of the brochure handy?
Oh, yes, I do. Am I live now? Here is our beautiful brochure. So this was printed by PrintAustin in conjunction with Almost Real Things. And this phenomenal cover art is by Carlos Hernandez, who is a really wonderful printmaker as well. And so this year's fair has gone virtual, and we have 60 participants, artists from national artists and international artists. And this publication is free on the PrintAustin website, although you will have to pay for shipping. Unless you are local, then you can do a drive-by pickup. But this is a really good little publication because it gives you a sneak peek into the artists that will be in the print fair. And I can go ahead and talk about the print fair now, or if that is coming up at a later section, I can wait and talk about that.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to quickly share the mission. So PrintAustin's mission is to share an enthusiasm for printmaking by helping galleries, universities, and artists curate, exhibit, and promote works on paper, and to engage a wider audience through artist talks, signage, panels, printmaking demonstrations, and print-focused art happenings. Pepe, I wonder if you could kick us off, actually, and could you talk about how you got involved with PrintAustin, please?
Yes. You know, first I want to say PrintAustin is a really fantastic project that have grown a lot. So I have been involved with PrintAustin for a few years. I believe about 4 years ago, I co-curated an exhibit with Paloma Mayorga, that is now the co-president or co-director of PrintAustin. And that was the first time that I came down to participate. I came down the year before that and as an observer, and really loved what was going on. And this was pretty early in the PrintAustin activities and events. So I really love the whole concept of you know, a whole month dedicated to the medium, you know, so it's very exciting. So then we did that show, and then I participated another year. I'm part of another group. It's a consortium of print studios called Consejo Gráfico Nacional. And we exhibited one of our portfolios at Mexiarte. I believe it was 2 years ago. And so every time I got the chance to come down, and I will just come down for that, and really love the variety of stuff. And this is what we're going to talk about in the print world, you know, all the different levels of activities, from museum exhibition to gallery shows to demonstrations to talk to print expos and all that. So it's very dynamic, and that's really important to foster the medium and to present the medium as in all its powers.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. I totally agree. Last year was my first year experiencing PrintAustin for the first time, and it is exactly that. It's so dynamic and it's so diverse in its offerings and its sort of points of access to printmaking. And Annalise, I know last year you also curated a pop-up exhibition in the Blanton's HEB print study room, showcasing Texas artists in the museum collection. But with coronavirus, this year is, of course, a little bit different. You kind of prefaced this earlier, but I want to tap you now, please. And can you talk a little bit about not only how you got involved with PrintAustin, but also a little bit about this year's fair and its hybrid programming?
Absolutely. So I joined PrintAustin, I believe, in the second year that it was taking place. And I've done all kinds of things, from doing panel discussions, as we see in this slide, to artist talks and community outreach like this program, or radio interviews promoting PrintAustin programming. I've had personal exhibitions as a printmaker, and then also I've participated in the print fair, which I really love. And so currently we are about halfway through this year's print programming in terms of the whole general festival, which again takes place from January 15th to February 15th. And you can see the current offerings that are coming up on the calendar of the PrintAustin website. And so there are still exhibitions and demos and artist talks and all kinds of great happenings taking place all over town. You'll have to kind of see if things are happening in person in a limited capacity or if they're just virtual, but you can find out that information online. As far as the print fair that we call the PrintExpo, that is taking place on February 6th. And it's a big fair this year. I mean, we saw a picture in an earlier slide where you can kind of see the saturation of that event. We fill the Blue Genie Art Bazaar from wall to wall with artist booths that are full from just, top down, with amazing printmaking and all different types of mediums and processes and sizes, and from artists all over the country. And this year, we have had to pivot online to 60 participants, which is a really wonderful number. It's allowed us to include more people in this year's fair. And we have national and international artists. And so the way the fair is working now, since it is virtual, we will really be missing seeing everyone in person. But this has also allowed us to expand the programming and do a conference alongside the print fair. So when you register for the print fair, which is done through the PrintExpo website, and registration is free, it's open to the public, but the registration will just get a little link sent to your email. So when the print fair website goes live, you can just hop on that link and it'll take you right to the page. And you will be able to see the print virtual booths of 60 different artists, and you'll be able to peruse their work and purchase their work. And then a benefit of going virtual this year is that expanded programming. So this print conference will also be taking place the day of the print fair. And there are offerings by artists that are participating in the fair, and it runs the gamut from artist talks and artists talking about their individual practices. There are going to be discussions such as art as activism, talks about the history of Japanese printmaking. There's a panel between queer printmakers. There are going to be demonstrations on letterpress, relief, screen printing, printmaking from home. It'll kind of show you how to gather accessible materials or make your own materials so you can do some printing at home, how to set up a print shop. So there's going to be a lot of wonderful programming there that will be accessible to PrintExpo visitors. And the fair itself is just that one day, February 6th. However, the artist profiles and pages will be up and shoppable until September. So if you visit and you see something you really love and you want to go back and buy it, you won't have time.
Yeah, it's like an overwhelming amount of goodness. There's so much there. It's exciting for people like me, a self-professed crazy print lady. It's just like, this is my Christmas, this is my Hanukkah, this is my everything, you know. It's very fun. Okay, that was a lot. So I think actually we're gonna just dive into your practices, if that's okay, because I want to get into what actually a print even is. And I love this introductory photograph because you can see original works of art made in multiples. And Annalise, looking at your works, can you give us maybe just a brief overview of your practice and what drew you to printmaking in particular?
Yes, so printmaking in essence is pulling an image onto a piece of paper from a tool that's called the matrix. And so the artist creates the imagery on the matrix Here we're looking at a woodcut, so that is carved into wood. I also specialize in etchings, which is use a copper plate and chemistry to etch into the copper. And then you go through a series of print processes that allow you to manually transfer your inked image from the matrix onto paper. And you can print that multiple times, which is why we refer to fine art printmaking as multiple originals, not to be confused with reproductions, because those are two different things. And so, yeah, I specialize in woodcut and etching, and I engage themes of personhood and identity and ideas of longing and belonging and a sense of home. And if you want to hear more about like the deep ethos of my studio practice, there's a podcast that I'm going to plug called Pine Copper Lime. It is the internet's #1 printmaking podcast. And I had the pleasure of joining Miranda to talk about my studio practice last year. And she speaks with printmaking artists from all over the world. And so if you enjoy hearing about artists' work and practices, I highly recommend that podcast. And what drew me to printmaking really, I mean, the first time that I tried printmaking, I was a young student. I was 16 years old, and really just immediately fell in love with the materiality of the process. I love using hand tools to carve into wood, and using chemistry to etch into copper plates. And then the process of printing from those matrices and the problems that arrive and the creative problem solving that, you know, you have to go through in order to print your edition. And then, you know, we often work in collaborative environments, collaborative studios. And so there's a constant dialogue and creative problem solving. And, you know, it's fun and invigorating, and printmakers are so cool and so willing to share their knowledge and information. So, you know, I'm constantly learning from my print friends and print colleagues. And so I just knew right away, it's how I wanted to make my work, and it's how I wanted to bring people into my life, and it's the world I wanted to live in. And I never looked back.
I think that's so great. And we're going to get into collaboration a little bit later and like really dig in, because like you said, it is just such a huge part of printmaking and really is what makes it such an attractive process on so many levels. But I want to get into a little bit of the media you referenced, because what I really love about your work is how devoted it is to that tactile quality of printmaking, the real intimacy with materials, not just in carving the matrix, but also the carefulness with which you choose sheets of paper and your ink colors. So just on a very basic level, could you introduce us to what a relief print is?
A relief print is carved typically on wood or sometimes on a synthetic material like linoleum. These are on MDF, which is just basically a compressed particle board, compressed sawdust. And so with a relief image, you carve down into the block, and then you roll the ink onto the surface of the block. So this image here on the left is a perfect example of that. I've carved away everything around all the black lines that you see. And then I can roll ink on the surface of that woodcut and run it through a printing press with paper, and the ink transfers from the surface of the plate. In other print processes, which I'm sure we'll lead into, the image comes from other areas of the print process, but in relief, it comes from the surface. And so yes, in etching, these are copper plate etchings. In an etching, you cover your copper plate with a waxy resist substance, and then you use a series of needles to draw into that wax that exposes the copper. And then you put that copper plate into an acid bath, and the acid etches down into those lines, those incised lines. And then you clean off the surface of the plate, and you forcefully press ink down into those incised lines, and you clean off the surface. So it's essentially kind of a reversal of that relief process. You run this with damp paper through a printing press under a lot of pressure, and then the image transfers from below the surface of the matrix to the paper. So it's just kind of a reversal, where the image is coming from, whether it's the surface of the wood block or underneath the surface of the etching.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so helpful. And I love seeing these shots from your studio. And that process of inversion is actually kind of like doubly true in printmaking, right? So with relief, the inked lines are sitting above the surface of the matrix. With intaglio prints like copper etching that you were describing, the ink sits below the surface, and that's how you draw the line. So there's that kind of opposites in both forms of printmaking. But in both examples, whatever is facing you right to left will then reverse on the paper, right? So whatever we see on the matrix here will be printed, left to right as soon as you get it onto the final impression.
Yes.
And I love this shot too, because you really get a beautiful glimpse into that process. Could you talk just really quickly about how prints track the art making process and what we mean when we discuss variant states?
Yes, so continuing off that previous slide, you saw 3 plates there, and each one of those plates corresponds to a different color. So on this image on the left, you can see that we've already printed the green plate. We are pulling the print off the red plate. And then in the image on the right, we have added the black plate, which brings the image together in completion. And so typically when you are creating your matrix, you go through a process of proofing it. So, working on this copper plate, I'll be etching it and I'll want to see what it looks like. So I'll pull a print from it and then decide to make changes here. I'll add something here. I'll make something lighter here, darker there. And as you build your matrix and go through that process of completing it, you will pull state proofs, what we refer to as state proofs. So you can kind of see what's happening. A lot of times your matrix will look a bit different than your print will. So the print, when you actually pull it, is a surprise. You've spent all this time essentially making this tool that you're using to create the actual artwork. And then once you get your plate made and you have, variant states of development of that plate, you go into the color trials. And so then you experiment with colors and layering your colors in different types of paper. And so it's all this experimental process, figuring out, the ideal materials for the edition that you're trying to produce. So then you end up with those trial proofs, those state proofs of, experimenting with your matrix and whether it's done or not, whether you like it or not. And then also color development, you get color trial proofs. And so those are the impressions outside of the edition that kind of show you all the work that went into making that final edition.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. It's so clarifying to hear it from an artist themselves to explain it. Pepe, it's your turn in the hot seat. So could you tell us a little bit about your practice and how you became such an advocate, not just for printmaking as a medium, but an advocate for printmakers themselves?
Yeah, it's actually, I started here in Austin. I used to live here in the early 90s. So I used to work commercially until I met Sam Coronado, and we're not related. Sam is Chicano artist, and I'm from the Caribbean, as you said, Dominican Republic. But Sam have just started a project called Serie Project in East Austin, in the old 6th Street before people used to wander into the east side. And what I, like Annalise was saying, you fell in love with the medium itself first, right? The quality of the marks, the different process, in this case, screen printing was my favorite, the one that I devoted most of the time. And the process itself is slightly different than relief and etching and lithography. So it's more of a stencil-based process and a photo-based to transfer the images or drawing into the screen. It's a photographic process. So it has a lot of different elements, right? Mechanical, photographical, and so all those things are kind of interesting. And we started producing work, our own work, but Serie Project was a residency program that we invited artists to the studio and we will print for them. So that exposure really opened a lot for me, in the sense that, like Annalise was saying again, printmaking is a collaborative medium by nature, right? Because of all these different elements. So there are people that are very good about this part of the process and that part of the process. So, and then the artists conceptually have an idea. You have to figure out how that idea is going to be transferred into print and one medium, and how do you do all that? So there is a lot of exchange of knowledge, of information, and trial and error, which is the fascinating part of it. So what I experienced being a master printer in the project was how the medium itself created a community of artists. And that exchange, that environment, that vibe really, really appeals to me, right? So how the studio becomes a magnet for this production, but in that mechanical production, in that manual labor of producing multiple, there is a lot of intellectual debates, there is a lot of political debates, social issues, and then the location of the studio is very important. Where the studio is, where did this work being created, right? So we were in the old East Austin before the commercialization of it. And some concept was that to create art coming from Del Barrio, right? And that idea, that concept started out of nothing. And at the beginning was, sometimes people didn't agree with what we were doing, in the sense that, oh, why am I going to go over there if there is nothing going on the right? And but he stuck to it. I learned that experience, how that vibe becomes energetic and valuable, right? And with time, every artist that came by added something to it. Every print we made added something to it. And since we're talking about collection, now after 20 some years, that collection is huge and very valuable. But at the beginning, we didn't know the value of it, right? We were just working and producing. So that moment is very interesting to me, that kind of experimental idea. Let's do this, let's play with this. And the medium has a lot of historical connotation to the Chicano movement and that kind of grassroots graphic process that they aided and was part of this other social political movement. So
yeah, and that's something I wanted to ask you about in particular, because I think it really gets to the heart of printmaking, what you're describing. And your work, especially as a studio artist, I think exemplifies how printmaking can be a force for commenting on and bettering society and societal structures. So I'm curious if you could talk about maybe that connection you kind of alluded to with printmaking being a mechanical process that produces multiples, and how that ties into it being a kind of democratic art force.
Yes, and again, that's the foundation of printmaking, right? It's a democratic art form.
Yeah.
Why? Because you make multiples of, and they're original. They're singular. Each print is original. If you go down to the philosophical aspect of that labor, right? Every print is hand put together and produced. Like Annalise, when she wipes each plate, it's impossible to be able to do that repetition exactly the same. And then there is time, right? One print is done now, one print is done in 10, 20 minutes later, 2 days later, whatever. So philosophically, each print is unique, right? So now that creating multiples allowed for an expanded conversation and an expanded outreach. So now we break the barrier of time and space, because we can have a print here, we can have a print at a museum, at a library, at a print fair, at another country, and sometime at the same time. So that ability to communicate in a more direct way, in a faster way, in a more practical way. Now, obviously, some people have used that against printmaking, right? To kind of put it down a little bit. But I think with time, we have realized and have understood now the value of that connection to people, right? And that connection to this different environment, right? That you can have a show at a museum, but you can have your print at a print fair, right? And then that creates these dialogues. And the accessibility, right? The different people can actually consume it. And there is two ways to consume. Like in some of the work that we did when SETI started in East Austin, and the work that I did recently until I moved here last year in East Harlem in New York City, was that we were producing work in the neighborhood again, but sometimes the community consumes the work. And when people hear me saying consumption, they assume it's only a monetary transaction. And that's not what I'm talking about, right? The community gets to consume the work because they get to be part of it. One, by coming to the studio, but one, by seeing it in the different artists. I can have it, they can see it in my studio when I publish somebody else's work, but they can see it in their studio, and they can see it when they show, they can see it when I exhibit the work of the studio. So you have access for people to engage in this work. They don't have to necessarily purchase it. Now, if they can purchase it, you have a wider range of people that can afford this work because of its multiple pieces, right? Now, yeah. There are some artists that are very valuable and their prints are, really expensive. So these have very different levels. We cannot apply like this uniform idea to printmaking, but in the essence, that's a beautiful thing.
I think that's such an important point to emphasize. And as we're getting into a little bit more about collecting and starting to collect, that idea of consuming, not just by purchasing, but just by looking. You want to be able to hone your eye. What are you attracted to? What is speaking to you? And so, that's something that we explore in the Robertson exhibition, how it was really his voracious curiosity that led him to international artists, but certainly many, many socially grounded artists whose works have, are now exponentially more expensive. And that value is kind of a tricky thing, especially when we're talking about some of these confrontational works of art. But I think it's important to know that part of the collecting process is just looking, and that form of consumption is such a key part. And what's great about prints, like you said, is that because they're on paper, they're transportable, they're light, they're not a painting that's only hanging in one museum or one private collection somewhere, on the other side of the globe. They're everywhere and they're transmissible. And, you had Latin American artists doing mail art where they would actually, get around government censorship by just putting their art in the mail, literally, because it's paper. So there is that really wonderful quality to what we're discussing today. I'm gonna shuffle us along, and I just want Pepe, you to make a brief comment, because you get to the heart of printmaking so beautifully, not in your work, but also by founding Coronado Print Studio. Could you just tell us a little bit? You've mentioned it before. We've all touched on how we love collaboration, but can you talk about that just briefly?
So the studio is kind of an organic aspect, because it's interesting that when I started here with Sam Sam started Serie Project because a collector sent him to Los Angeles to do a print, to publish a print at a very important studio called Self-Help Graphics. So there is Sam and I when I have hair. And so Self-Help Graphics, Sam went there and he really loved what I'm just talking about. So he came back to Austin and he's like, yo, I need to start something here because that's really powerful what I just saw. So he started the project, but Sam wasn't a printmaker. He was a painter and a designer. So when I moved away in the mid 90s, I went to DC and worked with a couple of studios in DC, the Handprint Workshop International, that at that time we were publishing a big project between Russian and American artists. And Pyramid Atlantic, there is more of a kind of a general studio. They do a lot of paper making and book arts and prints. But then I got to New York after I was teaching and stuff, and went to New York and found my studio with a combination of a little bit of Self-Help Graphics, a little bit of Serie Project, and a little bit of Robert Blackburn, as I got to know his work and his legacy in New York, and I unfortunately never met him, but worked with a lot of artists that did meet him. And so I try to set that vibe in the studio where artists will always be coming in and out and exchange that knowledge, right? Like I might be printing with you, but some other artists come in, like in that slides you're showing, Karen is a lithographer, and I will bring artists to do talks and demos. The talks were talk/demos. So the audience really get to engage with her conceptually, but technically, right? In a very more informal setting, very relaxed, where we will just wander around the studio and the artists will show and express and share what they do. So it was not just what I did, but what we all did. So and that environment was very important for me to foster that kind of exchange.
Yeah, I love that sort of idea of like lineage and passing down and then bringing people into the printmaking. The way I think of it sometimes is like, once you drink the Kool-Aid, you're fully hooked on printmaking. It's definitely how I experience it. And it is that energy that you're picking up on by not just by the people who are bringing you into it, but then by, tapping a friend or realizing there's this other artist who might be able to teach you something new. It's ever evolving, but it has this really rich history that just has so many tentacles, it just kind of touches all of these great places. I'm rushing through some of our slides, but these are just a few more examples of collaborative projects that Annalise has worked on as a master printer, collaborative projects that you, Pepe, have worked on, various techniques. Here's an aquatint, which is another form of intaglio printmaking that Annalise explained to us earlier. And Annalise, I'm just going to ask you super quickly, because I love this piece of the printmaking puzzle. Can you explain what a chop is and show these are some examples of your own self-designed chops?
A chop is basically an identifying marker that allows one to know the provenance of a print and where it comes from. So every publishing studio has a chop, and self-publishers have chops. And my chop is the one on the left here and on the bottom of the picture in the right. And that's a symbol that is meaningful to me in the ethos of my studio practice. And then the other ones that we see here in the center, that is Egress Press in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. And above that is Tom Huck Evil Prints chop. So those are publications that I did with them. And so those were chopped with their own shop chops. And then if I self-publish my work, I will chop it with my own. And so this is fun because if you are in an exhibition or if you're in a museum and you see, if you're familiar with the chops, you can tell which prints came from which print shop. And that's just a really fun kind of print nerdy thing to do.
Totally. And it's something that I think is especially apt for contemporary print collecting, because one thing that you'll notice as you start looking at more and more prints, I hope, is that many of contemporary prints, it's important to have the full sheet of paper. So you're looking at the image from the matrix, but the whole sheet of paper is part of the work of art. And, when you're looking at older prints, oftentimes they were chopped up or cut down and you don't see the full sheet of paper they were made on because they were pasted into albums or, literally glued onto walls for people to look at. But it's great now. And so we have this kind of what I've heard referred to as a cult of margins. And so having full margins on a sheet of paper just is so luxurious. You really get to see that beautiful deckled edge on all of your paper, which is that irregular shape that goes back to the paper making process in addition to the printmaking process. So yeah, and then like you said, Annalise, just getting to be familiar with this network of printmakers and the way in which they move around workshops and print publishers, and everybody starts dipping their toes in everybody else's water. It's very fun. Okay, we've talked a lot about how prints are made and all the people involved in the making. So I hope that clarifies what a print is. And Annalise helpfully noted, and I'm just going to reiterate, we are talking about fine art prints, which are different than G-clay or archival or reproductive prints. So it's that artistic process and collaboration that distinguishes a fine art print from these reproductive prints. I still encourage all of you to go to your favorite museum gift shops and buy reproductive prints of works of art, bring them into your home. Just know that that is of a different type than what we're discussing right now, which are original works of art made in limited editions. So with that, let's look at a few examples of prints by Pepe and Annalise and just get into what we should be looking for when we start to collect. So Pepe, can you go over just some markers of quality? For example, looking closely at this print, I can see that you've signed and additioned the impression. What is an impression and an addition, and why are those important in this discussion?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good point to talk about, because we can tell a lot about a print by the edition number. So the edition number is a commitment that the artist made with his or her work in terms of, how many am I going to make of this image? Sometimes you can come into the process very predisposed. I want 10, 20, 50. Sometimes the process itself will dictate a little bit of that. But before I tell you about the numbers, what you said about the paper is very important. Now, or not now, probably for a long time, but choosing the paper is almost a very important part of the art making process in printmaking, because it's one of the things that we are really are interested on, right? The kind of paper, the surface of it, and the type of medium that you're gonna use. There are certain surfaces that will, kind of aid or enhance or allow that image to live in this carrier that you want it to be at, right? It's like your hands carrying the thing. So the number is important, and the number tells you a little bit about the artist, and it tells you a little bit about the process and the work itself. So there are artists that when you see a number in the high number, hundreds, 200, 300, which is possible in a hand production work, but that means that the artist is either really well known or well sponsored. There is a big audience where these works are going to be disseminated to. Then you see other numbers when you start getting into the 50s, 70s, right? That again is a print make with certain purpose of distributing this work. And now we are getting into a period of time where artists are becoming more experimental about the editions. They don't have that rigid affiliation to these big numbers and this equal edition, right? Like you're starting to see numbers in the the threes, in the fives, in the sevens, and now you're starting to see variations of those images, right? The traditional printmakers were very rigid. You know, you have to print 100 and they have to all be exactly the same, and then the plate have to be destroyed. You can't like play with that in any other way, right? So now, because a lot of us printmakers started to bring other artists into the medium, artists starting to push those things and be more flexible and more experimental. So, and then the size too can determine or push a little bit that number up or down, the facility to create these works. But look at the numbers when you're collecting work, like you said, if it's a poster, might be signed, might not even be numbered. If it might be numbered in the high numbers, a fine art print might be in the high numbers depending on the artist. Reproductions are usually not numbered. Some big production make posters and they have them signed, but they're offset prints and they think they're adding value to the print by numbering them, right? But in reality, it doesn't do anything to that, right? Because they can just make more. And so the commitment of the edition is important, because once I finish this edition, I'm not going to make more of those. Now, if it's a really well-known artist that somebody makes 20 prints edition and they all sold and the artist is really big, they might re-edition that. And that's another technical aspect of that we're probably not going to get into, but the number can tell you a lot about the print.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. And so you can sort of see on this print in the lower left corner, you see 1 out of 35. So
right.
One sort of the numerator is the impression. This is the first one you pulled, and then 35 is the complete number, and there will not be a 36. You made
right,
35
exactly.
of these prints.
Yes.
And you mentioned earlier that you were really drawn to screen print, and the 2 examples of your works that we've included here are both screen prints. But I'm really intrigued by this one because I think it has some visual qualities of lithography, and we actually had a question in the chat earlier. Are there still artists that make lithographs? The answer to that is yes. And the follow-up question is, how do you choose what sort of technique what you want to like express your idea through? Yeah,
the medium, matching the concept to the medium is a very fascinating process, right? Like Annalise was showing those wood blocks and then those etching, and you can see the qualities of them, right? So sometimes that image that you want certain impact, like you were talking about the tactile quality, you almost want to touch certain prints because the surface is so inviting and attractive. And in this case, like, you can see certain lithographical quality to this print, but it's a screen print. So, and actually I have several of those, and people say, "Are litho?" But part of it is that the technology has advanced. So the things I can achieve with a screen right now have evolved a lot. So I can get really, really that kind of quality in a screen print where people, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, were not seeing those qualities because the materials themselves were limiting. And they were coming off to our movement that were more into those flat colors and vibrant flat areas of color. So people kind of became associated screen printing with just these black open fields of color, right? And bold graphics and stuff. But because of the advance of material, now we can push those material and acquire drawing qualities that were not usually done in screen printing, right? So the mediums are now a little more, they have a little more reach.
Yeah, I think there's a really wonderful fluidity, and what you were saying about the process evolving and the materials allowing you to sort of cross those boundaries or blur some of the edges. As collectors, I hope that some of our viewers will start to get excited about the way that an etching looks versus the way a woodcut looks versus how a screen print looks. But just because you fall in love with one process, don't limit yourself necessarily. Don't only look for etchings, because there can be these really interesting process mimicries, you know, and so the way that you're evoking lithography via screen print, I think, is one of the real pleasures of looking at contemporary prints, because they do get to sort of trick the eye a little bit. Okay, we're running out of time. We have so much to talk about still. There's so much here. Annalise, both you and Pepe have had your prints exhibited across North America and internationally. Can you just talk about a little bit who collects prints? Because of course museums do, and private collectors, but also public institutions. And while you're talking about that, I wonder if you could address, someone in the chat asked, how do you display really large works of paper? And your prints can be quite monumental. So maybe who collects and how do you display them?
Yeah, so this print right here is 3.5 by 5 feet tall. So it's almost life size. And yeah, paper is pretty delicate. So when you make large prints, everything gets a little exponentially harder in terms of printing, in terms of storage, in terms of framing, transporting. So that's all something that has to be taken into consideration. And for that reason, these have been printed in very small editions. So this is a series of 8 prints that's ongoing, and I print them in an edition of 7. And yeah, they have been placed with private collectors who have purchased 1 print from the series up to 3 prints in the series. They've been collected by businesses. And institutional collecting, I think, is very, very important. And there are a lot of businesses who have blank walls and they want to put art on those walls, and printmaking is a great option for that. And so there are businesses in town, like the Frost Bank, for example. They have an incredible print collection, and they will work with art consultants who kind of do the hard part of like the shopping around and working within the budget and finding work that will match, you know, the taste of the business or institution. And they put proposals together, and they go through the purchasing process. And Frost Bank was specifically looking for Texas artists, and then they published a catalog of that work. And then, then we can talk about the private collectors, and whether it's somebody who has 5 prints that they've collected over a certain number of years and they hang in their home, and it's, their small private collection. Or if we're talking, I'm sure Pepe and I, we have artwork, I'm sure, all over our homes, and then also in our flat files. And then there are collectors like John Robertson at the show who have an extensive collection that they then will donate to a museum. And the upcoming exhibition at the Blanton, which I'm sure we'll plug, that's the Steinberg collection. And he was an avid print collector and scholar, and we're showing over 200 works from his collection. So private collecting can really run the gamut, depending on people's desire and interest.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that so perfectly sort of sums it up and gets back to what Pepe was saying earlier with, this is such a community thing. So whether it be visiting your local bank and seeing some works on paper on the wall, or visiting a friend's house, or visiting a studio. And so I'm going to use that as a seg into where to look for these works of art. And I'm going to run through this. You can look at museums. So here is Pepe and exhibited at the Barrio Museum. Here's another exhibition at the Mexican Cultural Arts Center and Mexa Arte Museum here in Austin. Pepe is also included in a really fantastic exhibition at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, Printing the Revolution. I encourage you all to look this up online. There are installation views, there are wonderful dives into all of the artists included in the exhibition, just really good online resources. That link has just been dropped in the chat. Thank you, Krista. galleries are another place. Oh, there's so much more we could cover, but thank you.
Can I say one thing real quick?
Yes. Oh, Pepe, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's because it goes with this. I just found out, we're talking about collection, and, Annalise saying how, the prints get collected. I just been told that Mexi Arte Museum right now, it's a show called Mexico, the Border and Beyond. And it's an exhibition from a selection of one Arturo Sandoval, who just donated his collection to Mexiarte. And I'm saying that too because I'm in that show. And it's just like somebody told me, hey, I saw your print on Mexiarte. I'm like, what? Oh, this collector. Oh, yeah, I remember meeting him in LA 10 years ago. So this is how the connections are really organic, and it's beautiful. So Mexiarte had that show right now, so it's a great place.
Oh, that's so exciting. Perfect. Thank you for sharing. And that sense of discovery is really the thread that ties all of this together. So thank you so much to both of you for joining us for this conversation. I wish we had 3 more hours to get into the weeds. I hope we've converted some new print enthusiasts, but please look for their work. I have both of their websites up for you here, as well as the website for PrintAustin and for the Blanton Museum exhibition Off the Walls. Welcome to the world of works on paper. Thank you to Pepe, thank you to Annalise, and that should wrap it up for tonight's conversation. Thank you to all of our viewers for joining us this evening. We so appreciate your involvement and engagement. Please plan to join us for our next free curated conversation at 5 p.m. Central on Tuesday, February 9th. It is also print related and a follow-up to today's discussion. It's titled, What's the Deal? A Print Collecting Primer, Part 2. And it features Holly Borum, the Blanton's Assistant Curator of Prints and Drawings, and selections from her major exhibition, which is opening February 7th. After Michelangelo, past Picasso, Leo Steinberg's Library of Prints. For details or to watch past curated conversations, please go to blantonmuseum.org/museum from home. And if you'd like to show your support, you can become a member, or with Valentine's Day coming up, give a sweet treat of a membership at blantonmuseum.org/membership. And if you just want to always be in the know about programs like this and other news, please sign up for our newsletter at blantonmuseum.org/subscribe. Thank you all again, and we hope to see you very, very soon.